Yeah, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you guys trying to get the message out.
Of
Yes,
course.
yes. So this is Creative Collection here. You know, we about bringing solutions. We about bringing good energy. We about bringing the truth. And today, this episode will be called "Be Brave, Do Something." I think y'all might have heard that slogan before. And we here with our special guest, Jodi O'Malley. You know, we're gonna get into some deep truth today.
Want to shout out to everyone in the room. Shout out to New York Freedom Rally, all of our listeners, Tyree, developer, CHC.
We just want to make sure that everybody taps in and, like I said, with Trooper, get in the gym, with Squeaky Gyms, with all our health sponsors, everybody just taps in and takes a look. These herbs are very good for your health. So that's why we're promoting health over here and we're sharing that with you all.
Right, right. Shout outs to
Yeah,
Kevin. Kevin, you want to speak?
What's up, guys? How we doing?
I'm good. How are
Good.
you?
Doing great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to Jodi. I don't think we've ever. I think we have a mutual friend in Karen, aka Nurses for Freedom, down in Staten Island. Yeah, no, it's been a minute. It's good to be with you guys.
Yeah. So thank you to all the freedom fighters who have been fighting for our rights for such a long time. It's been maybe two plus years, and we're finally seeing a breakthrough. But don't stop fighting because it's still a fight. All right.
How's everybody doing? How's everybody feeling?
I'm good. I'm just, I'm just here, man, and I'm just ready to have this conversation because I know it's going to be a very informative conversation, especially for the people that are not, in tune and they didn't see, what she did, how impactful it was, and how brave it was, what she did to expose the truth. It took a lot for her to risk her career. It took a lot for her to have the bravery to put what she put on camera and show people the truth so in such a way where it just can't be denied. It's something where you just kind of either got to just be like, you know what, this is the truth, or let me just ignore this one. Let me just skip around that, not, act like that didn't happen so I could get back to programming. It's one of those things that's so undeniable. So it's good to have this type of situation exposed.
So we're going to into the questions first with Jodi. We can start it off with you just introducing yourself to the youth, to the room, and to our future watchers and listeners, so they know exactly who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Jodi O'Malley, and I'm a master's prepared critical care nurse who throughout COVID worked in the intensive care, the emergency room, and hospital supervisor. I had a wide variety of knowledge, right? I saw the patients that came into the emergency room that went home and they were okay. And then I saw the sickest of the sick that went to the ICU. And then I also saw a lot of admissions by the doctor, because what happens in the hospital, a physician gets a call from an ER doctor and says, I have a patient that I want to admit. I need you to come down here and look at them. So the physician would go down to the ER, decide if they're going to admit the patient. Once they make the decision to admit, they have to call the hospital supervisor. So a typical example would be I get a call from the physician. Hey, I have a patient, John Doe, 29 years old, COVID pneumonia. I'm going to admit him to ICU. And then at that point is where I start questioning him. And I said, okay, well, what makes him appropriate for ICU admission? What are we doing for him? And then at that point, I decide and I tell the doctor, no, he's not appropriate for ICU. We'll put him on a med-surg floor. But one of the tragedies that happened in the hospital, well, there were many, but one of the things being a hospital supervisor is at the end of the shift, we had to report to the state's reporting system. At the end of the night, I tell the state, okay, I have 12 ICU beds. 5 of them are filled up with COVID patients. But now, for example, it's not necessarily a COVID patient if they're only there because the PCR test made them positive. That ICU patient may have just been, an alcohol withdrawal, and COVID had nothing to do with it, right? But still, yet, I had to report to the state database that I had a COVID patient on the floor. Now, technically, I did not. We weren't doing anything to treat that COVID patient, but you can't, detail it that specific on that report. So in the very beginning, I noticed that all of these inflated numbers were happening because this was the policy everywhere, right?
Right.
And it's like, oh my gosh, first of all, I could take you back to, just the very beginning when we shut down the non-essential surgeries. Now, to the American public, they hear non-essential surgeries. Well, we don't really need those anyway. We can hold off on that. But that wasn't true. Those non-essential surgeries are anything, including what's not going to immediately kill you, right? So a non-essential surgery could be removing that tumor from that cancer patient, or going into the cath lab and getting that clot out of the heart, right? But why should we wait until that clot actually made them have a heart attack? So all of these patients were sitting around waiting to get treated or diagnosed. And that immediately made me say, wow, this isn't public safety. What are we doing? We're, telling people to stay home for 2 weeks because we don't know about this virus. But essentially, we live in America, and everybody has a right to determine what their level of risk is. Every single day, we perform risk versus benefit analysis. All of us do. Like, is it worth me getting in my car, driving to my job? Yes, it is, right? So little things like that we've always done. But the government just took that away and put a 24/7 death toll ticker up on the screen to institute fear. And my 10-year-old son saw it immediately as propaganda because it's repeated messaging over and over. And at the basis of that messaging was fear. Fauci and the Surgeon General came out and said, masks don't work. We're not going to be a nation of mask wearers. They do nothing to stop the virus. But then they flipped the script and they're like, oh no, you need to wear a mask. And it's not to protect you. It's to protect your fellow man. And it's like, man, are you kidding me? But so many people fell for that. And for me, I'm looking at my doctors and nurses and being like, why are you going along with this? Why are you covering up your face for 12 hours knowing damn well it does nothing except could cause you harm? But the government came out and said, oh, it's droplets, but big droplets when somebody speaks. And it's like, no, this virus is so small, it stays suspended in the air. So there's nothing that we can do other than, either try to eliminate it, which we couldn't. The next thing would be to destroy it, which we could have done, guys. We could have easily equipped Americans with very inexpensive technologies in their HVAC system to destroy the virus particles in the home. But we didn't do that. Nope. What did we do? We decided to, create fear. And with respiratory pathogens, we need to create circulation and ventilation. But we told people to stay inside. We didn't even tell them to open up their windows and put a fan on in the house.
Right.
Right. And then we have the PCR testing. And never before have we used PCR testing. So PCR testing is taking a sample and amplifying it. So if you take a sample of anything and amplify it so much, you're going to find something there, right? A little fragment, piece of a particle.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we were doing. There was no standard on PCR testing where the cycle threshold was limited at, say, 18 cycles. We were doing it at 52 cycles, for example.
Wow.
And it's like, and then we're telling that person who had absolutely no symptoms that you could be infected and kill somebody and not know it. And, it's just, now, we could get into the vaccine part of it, but, I'll stop there to see if you guys have any questions on that.
This is why, it's just ridiculous that policies overstand, people with actual experience out here. I feel like they put policies on top of doctors, nurses, important people that are actually in these facilities putting the work in, got their feet on the ground doing these things, actually can teach people something about what's going on. I think that's a big problem because it just sounds like, to me, it sounds like you're a shot caller in your place of your industry, your place of business, or maybe your place of helping people. I'll say you're a shot caller because you have to take something and you check and balance things, basically, like, oh, this comes to you and you make sure this diagnosis is right before things proceed and go on to the doctor. They need to put more respect on that and stop trying to take the doctor out of his role, stop trying to take the nurse out of his role, stop trying to take people out of their positions, and stop getting advice from politicians and etc. Because making it political just makes no sense. What you're saying actually makes sense for the people to take in.
Yeah, absolutely. What they did with any propaganda messaging is censorship. So with propaganda, there has to be an element of fear that's repeated over and over and over again. And then there also has to be censorship to any competing narrative. And that's what they did. And then what they did, they took it a step further and said, listen, if you try to speak out about this, you are going to come after your paycheck. And so Americans were like, oh, shoot, my paycheck. Now, listen, I'll tell you for myself, I was a teenage mom. I had my first son when I was 16, and I was single with 2 kids by the time I was 20 in an abusive relationship. So I know what it means to struggle. I know what it means to have to, clean people's homes or wash windows or do whatever I needed to do, to raise my kids. And now fast forward, now I'm 40 in my 40s, right? And I finally get my government job. I get my government job. I got my master's degree. I have one son at home who's, he'll be 13 next month. And I'm like, man, I'm at the pinnacle of my career. My 2 kids are upstanding citizens and they got their own life. And now I got my baby at home and I'm making 6 figures. Government's paying me $20K a year back to my student loans just for working at the federal facility. They were also going to pay for me to get my nurse practitioner's license. I mean, I'm in a spot, right? Like, I ran that hospital when I worked, and so they let me pick my schedule. They gave me all the benefits. And also, what's important to know for people out there is that throughout COVID, because I work for a federal facility, I got a 25% pay increase for hazard pay. So I'm living the life, essentially, and that's what so many people, Americans are comfortable. I have a lot of friends. I mean, I grew up in the inner city of Chicago, and I have a lot of friends that recognize communism and fled communism. And when this all started, they saw that propaganda and they're like, oh man, where are we going with this? And I was like, yeah, right. Well, what happened was they told people, if you speak out against this, you're going to lose your livelihood. We're going to come after your license. Well, all that did for me was fire me up even more because I spent my life fighting the bully, And now you're not going to tell me just because I'm sitting pretty that I'm going to compromise my morals and my values and my ethical principles and the oath that I took to protect people so that I can protect you and protect my paycheck. Like, man, get out of there with this nonsense. Like, that's not who I am. You're just going to fire me up even more. Essentially, that's what they did, And now, for the last year, since my story was released, they've been trying to find a reason to fire me. I mean, they spent 6 months investigating me on top of the already in-depth investigation that I had to undergo before I got hired. They were looking to try to find something on me, and they didn't. And now, they're still paying me. I haven't showed up in that hospital in over a year, but I still get my paycheck every 2 weeks.
God bless you.
And that's what I want people to know. Like, man, when bullies, they back down when you stand up.
Yes, they do.
So stop being fearful. And for me, I was like, well, if I got to go live on a couch at my mom's house and I got to go back to bartending again, then so be it. But I have to look at myself in the mirror every day. I have to lay down in bed at night and know that if God were to take me at any moment, that I did all I could on this earth,
Amen.
And I think people they don't realize that. Like, Yeah, every single time you back down or you try to compromise with the bully, your integrity, your self-esteem, your confidence just whittles away. And that's what they did to a lot of people. But, on the backside of it, like God has a plan. And there's no doubt in my mind that he's calling his people together for his purpose. And the
Right.
light always shines brighter in the darkness. So what COVID did for a lot of us is expose that darkness.
Right.
And then now we're like to be lights in the darkness and know that the truth will always win. But we just got to be bold. We got to be unafraid. We got to be relentless, revolutionary, and just speak out, knowing that this world is not our home. And if you're living and you're following what man says, you're going to be disappointed every time.
Every single time. I'm glad you confirmed that. All of the words that you just said is like, we speak this daily into people, into the atmosphere. And it's like those who have deaf ears, God said you got to let them go. Those people who want to not listen and not see what's happening, and it's right there in front of their face, you have to let these people go, because that's what they want to do. We all have free will. We cannot force. You know how they say, oh, you could bring, the donkey to the water. You can't force them to drink. The horse to the water. You can't force them to drink. This is what we're doing. This is what we're seeing. We're seeing everyone is bringing everyone to the water. And we cannot force everyone to drink.
It's time to gather the lions. The sheep are going to be the sheep, but where we're at in this war of good versus evil is gathering the lions and being bold. Like I said, if we compromise, there's only so long that you can put your head in the sand before you look up and you don't even recognize where you are. And that's what's happening to our country right now, is people, it's almost unrecognizable with all the BS going on, saying that there's another gender. It's like, hold on a second. God created man and woman, Like, I have friends that are, I have a friend that's transgender. I'll call her name that she wants and I'll say she, but essentially she's a man. And we know that. Do you know what I mean? We don't...
Right.
It's like, am I kind and loving to her? Yes, because I look at her as a human being.
Right.
She doesn't, shove her stuff down my throat, and I certainly don't shove mine down her throat,
Yeah, that's how it has to be too as well, because when you become an extremist and then people start to feel judged, they'll just use that as an attack to not learn the lesson and get the knowledge that they need to just promote something better at least.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's just the same as like, in June of 2020, when we had like the BLM coming out and rioting, everybody coming out. Immediately, I went to the cigar bar down the street and they were open because it's a cigar bar, right? You didn't have to wear a mask in there. And they stayed open, and it was, 90% Black in there, lots of people that fled Chicago and Wisconsin throughout that time and came to Arizona. And we're all sitting there. It's like, man, them trying to put on that there's this whole racist thing going on, and we're supposed to like be divided and all of that. Weak-minded people fell for that. Weak-minded people that wanted. I think at that time, what that also created was a sense of belonging for so many people, right? Because these kids, they were stuck at home. They were told that they couldn't go out, but they could go out if they rioted, if they protested.
Yeah.
And so many people that, even prior to the June 2020, our kids, I mean, they've suffered. They don't know what it's like to go out and meet people naturally. They have all these fake friends on social media, and quite frankly, their lives were fake because it's only what you want to represent on social media. So maybe for the first time for a lot of them is like, now they're developing in-person human connections for this cause that was all fabricated.
Right. Yeah. That is something. It's kind of weird because right before the shutdown, I was working in my daughter's school, and they were like programming them to learn how to use social media. It didn't hit me until you just said that. Wow. Like they were programming the children how to create usernames and not to put their business out there. It was like they were getting courses on how to create their their profile on social media. And the next thing you know, we're trying to figure it out step by step by what the government was dictating to the Department of Education. Each day, we had to figure out what we would tell these children because we knew the schools were being shut down. We just didn't know when. We had to wait until the CDC dictated or the government. So we were just like slowly teaching them how to become online learners and
Yep.
take away. It was like each day they were like taking away our rights, stripping our rights. Is even in the medical field for me, the taking the oath. That Hippocratic oath is to protect the people, do not harm. And I watched day by day them just stripping our rights, our constitutional rights, our natural rights, everything, stripping down to the children. The children didn't understand it. So it was like, wow, are we lying to our children right now? Because they're about to experience the biggest depression ever. And it was just, so it was sad. Like, just don't know.
I hear you. Like, I think all of this, really was meant to target the children because they came at them aggressively. I mean, they told people, that you could kill somebody by just the mere act of breathing and not know it.
Right.
And I was like,
a big ball of fear.
Yeah. And I looked at my son, who was 10 at the time, 11. I thought like, wow, okay, well, I was your age when AIDS came on the scene, 84, 85. I'm his age. And I just think, what would my life have been like? They were promoting that you could be infected with this virus and not know it. The difference is that they didn't push the act of breathing.
Crazy that you said that. The same people who's dictating this whole hysteria is the same people that dictated your hysteria when you was in that age.
That's right. Fauci, he was at the helm of it. Again, he came out with that AZT, which was like the most toxic medication. People were only living like 6 months after being on that. But they created this, like, you want it. You want to try to get it. But they were like, oh, no, not everybody's going to qualify, right? But it wasn't 24, like, we didn't have the media necessarily weaponized the way it is now.
Right.
And, and I looked at my son and I was like, absolutely not. You're not wearing a mask. We're going to go with faith over fear. Because as followers of Yeshua, we know we are commanded to choose faith over fear. And if something were to happen, we should be ready to go at any time. So, I mean, we lived our life. I walked around that hospital without a mask on. And like I said, they left me alone because I was such a valuable resource for them, Right. And they didn't want to lose me. And, but I traveled, like, my dad came, to visit from Chicago, like, yeah, but what we did to the kids about putting masks on them, like that created such a fear narrative and took away the human aspect because, it's easy to look at somebody that has a mask on and not really see them as a human being with emotion.
Yeah. Right.
When they came out with the whole asymptomatic thing, it just made me realize how strong-minded you got to be to really, really break through and get past the fear margin. Because it's like, dang, now I can't do nothing. I can't be around people. I can't do this. I can't do that. You got to really break through, like, wait a minute. And when that happened, I was like, nah, this is nonsense. This can't be true. Because if this was true, then this means we would be... I started to think logically at that point, like,
exactly.
if this was true, then we'll go to the corner store or we'll be driving in the city and just see people on the floor or something like that. At that point, if I get in contact with you and just breathe in the air and you catch COVID and you susceptible and you have comorbidities and stuff like that, it's gonna be people all over the floors, all over the city, at least a couple.
Right.
Come on now, I'm not just looking. The news is not my foundation. Like.
And this is what I'm saying, like, this is a prime example of the public school system just failing people. Failing people because there's a lack of independent thinkers. Like in major cities, there is no social distancing. Like this is impossible. It literally doesn't make any sense.
Cities. When I saw the homeless people still where they are on the floor, on the trains, all over the city, and it's not affecting them. And I'm like, okay, so this is not real. And the nerve of them to bring something that's supposed to be privacy of your health, privacy, which is totally violation of the HIPAA laws, by the way. And you're putting vaccines on the street and the train stations to make it seem like you're doing something for homeless people. How about get them some help? Put them in a home or put them somewhere where they belong. You're still creating mass hysteria like, oh my gosh, COVID, COVID on a train, COVID on a train. But that's not healthy. How could you think that health and train could be in one sentence? Like, how can you give a vaccine publicly on the train to anyone? That is total violation of health and safety.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And Kevin, if you want to speak, you can feel free to speak.
I would like to ask Jodi one question. You mentioned earlier about like the difference between doctors, nurses, and the liability that nurses technically face. The news that broke maybe a couple weeks ago now from California about the health system, the hospital workers, including nurses, if I'm not mistaken, they were held liable for malpractice. I can't remember the exact wording. It was related to the remdesivir and the protocols they were using in California.
You know, I think that we're going to see a ton of lawsuits with that. And here's the thing, we're supposed to do our due diligence. We operate under evidence-based practice, which essentially means the best available science. Every person that has a license, they should have immediately recognized, number one, we never ever tell somebody you could be infected with a disease that could kill you, but there's absolutely nothing we could do. So go home, and then if the virus gets so bad that it's causing you to, essentially die by not being able to breathe, then come back to the hospital and we'll give you another experimental medication called remdesivir. Every single nurse and doctor should have just had their light switch go off and say, how come we're not giving them anything? How come we're not telling them, to have a better diet, right? To lower your sugar because viruses love sugar. How come we're not giving them albuterol nebulizers, which we normally do? But they were like, oh, but no, that could be aerosolized in the air. So we're not going to do what's best for the patient. Like, for example, somebody has issues breathing. How come we didn't give them a steroid, protocol? That is standard of care. How come we didn't give them an antibiotic because a person has a virus that's overtaken their body? They're susceptible to secondary infections. So how come we're not, giving them an antibiotic? How come we're not using vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc? Right. How come we're not doing these things? Now, fast forward to, doctors that were actually developing protocols that included ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Well, look at what our FDA said. They said, you're not a horse. Like, are you kidding me? This is on the world's list of essential medications for humans. It won a Nobel Peace Prize. It has antiviral, anti-inflammatory properties. So everybody heard about that side of the propaganda. They had a duty to look that up. They had a duty to say, would this harm the patient? It may not be effective, but would it harm them? No, so let's try it. That's how, prior to 2020, we practiced medicine.
Right, absolutely.
So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but as far as remdesivir, that was an experimental toxic drug. And with a little bit of research, you would have seen that in 2020, they came out, or in 2019, the NIH came out and said that they tried it for the Ebola trial, but it killed 53% of patients. So they stopped the study because too many people were dying from it. So now, 6 months later, we got Fauci, the dude, in AIDS that promoted AZT, now promoting remdesivir, and then saying, oh, yep, this is going to be the only protocol that is supposed to be used in hospitals. And to ensure that that happens, we're going to give the hospitals a 20% bonus payout if they use it.
Yeah.
I mean, ridiculous. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I think that answers the question. It's amazing to me because I was watching Fox News, or I was watching a clip from Fox News rather, because I don't really watch the news that much. I was watching a clip, and they said 75% of diseases is caused by stress. So not only are they not doing anything for treatment, and they're not doing the proper treatments or God-given natural treatments and stuff like that, they're also causing a massive amount of stress due to saying that it's a virus out here, you can die from it any second, due to people losing their jobs, due to hysteria, due to inflation and all of this stuff. This stress is getting insane. So for me, it's just like, not only are we ignoring the proper treatments and using things like resveratrol, you're also just not treating people for the main cause of diseases in general, which is stress.
That's exactly correct. What they did was destroy the family unit. They took the caregiver ability to provide for the family. They, stunted that. Now, not to mention, the 90% of child abuse cases are noticed in the schools. Right. So now you have that child that would, have some reprieve out of the home by going to school. Now you took that away from them, and now they're 24/7 in the home with their abuser. I had one case where a mother brought in her 1-year-old child, and she said, he won't let me change his diaper. This isn't like him. I don't know what happened. And immediately we're just like, oh my God, what happened? And as she's telling her story, she's saying, yeah, the daycare's closed down, so he couldn't go to daycare, and I have to work. And so one of my son's friends, that's like a son to me, volunteered to watch the baby for me while I worked. And he's been in my home for 3 years now. And he watched the baby, and you don't even want to be in that room when we had to tell the mother that that baby was sexually assaulted.
Oh
you know what I mean? And it was like, we were seeing all of that kind of stuff. We were seeing kids come in with severe abdominal issues, and it was all related to stress. Yes, you're exactly right. Stress kills. It absolutely does. And everything that we did with these COVID protocols was to induce stress and induce fear and destroy the family unit, and to take people away from gathering. We have the churches that shut down because they didn't want to lose their 501c3 status.
Yeah.
And not to mention our community of, addiction, right? We have people that rely on community and going to their AA or NA meetings and being around people on a daily basis. We shut that down. And all those people, a lot of people that had, issues with addiction, they went back to it. And I mean, myself included. I mean, if I was an alcoholic, I probably would have relapsed, but food has been my issue. And for the 5 years prior, I lost a whole bunch of weight, and I got my life back, and I got happy again. And then throughout COVID, it's like, now I'm eating more, because that was how I dealt with the emotions that I was going through. Right. And now I'm back at square one again, needing to lose 40 pounds. And I'm like, man, how did I let COVID do that to me? How did I let that evil do that to me? But yeah, as far as our poor kids are concerned, the education that they were receiving in the public school system, I believe the darkness was exposed there. I can look back at me, I'm 47 years old, and, I remember the Constitution enough to take that test in 8th grade. They didn't try to let us know, like, hey, as American citizen, these are your rights. Because if every one of us remembered that and knew, we would have revolted immediately and said, no, we're not doing this. Yep. Instead, you only had a few people that knew that. And then they were labeled extremist and fringe, and they didn't care about other people,
Right.
Meanwhile, those are the ones that actually wholeheartedly, passionately care about the people.
Yes, absolutely. And, there was a study done on how many people or what types of people obeyed the protocols. And it was the people that had a high school or less education, or that did not obey the protocols. And so it was those people that had less than a high school or less education, because those are the real critical thinkers, right? Essentially, those are the ones that have street smarts. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly that's what I brought to the table. Kind of like what you were saying. Like, if this asymptomatic thing is true, then we would be seeing people die all around us.
Right.
Instead, every single death practically happened in the hospital. Well, what was the common denominator then?
And
Remdesivir.
let's not forget, every single death happened in the hospital, and 75% of them had 4 comorbidities. Let's not forget that part.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep. It's just like our children. I mean, I looked at the numbers the other day, and from 0 to 18, we have approximately 73 million kids. Okay. And since January 1, there has been reported like 1,600 deaths. 1,600 deaths in a population of 73 million for 2.5 years is a number that's not statistically significant. Not to mention that every single one of those deaths, these kids were on death's door anyway, with leukemia or, childhood illnesses. So you're right. Like there's really not been any child. This is not a childhood disease. And now we're having the CDC recommending this on the vaccination schedule when we really have no safety reports of it, and it's not even approved. I mean, it's mind-blowing that we're where we're at right now. And I think, all that's doing is just stirring people up and making them realize that they've been duped.
Right. I was watching the numbers with Kevin, New York Freedom Rally. He was going over the results with the CDC and showing all of the numbers and the amount of vaccines that they have for children. And I mean, it's unbelievable, because it's like they're telling you, okay, if you have such and such, if you have asthma, if you're allergic to eggs, if you're allergic to fish, they'll tell you, you can't take this. But then they'll turn in the same sentence, they'll say, well, you have to take this. And that's what happened in the beginning too, because in the beginning it was supposed to be for the elderly, right? First, they said, I remember because I help my elderly family and they have comorbidities. Everyone has diabetes, heart defibrillators. I remember correctly. If you have metal in your body, they said, do not take this vaccine. If you have any allergies, if you have any heart problems, you cannot take this vaccine. What happened?
Yeah.
They have no studies, no proof. These people are the studies. They are the clinical trials, which they don't understand that part. There has not been no real 7-year history study about this specific type of mRNA design, or whatever you want to call experiment. These are the clinical trials today.
You're exactly right. We are in the clinical trial. And when I was working in the hospital, I would tell people, listen, it's our job to collect the data. We are in a clinical trial right now. We have got to collect the data and put it on VAERS so that people know.
Part. Yeah,
right. But you know what? They didn't want to know, because they themselves took the injection, and there's no way that it's coming out of their body. So they didn't want to know. They didn't want to research to find out like what's going on. It was better to be like cognitively dissonant on it, because, if they were to do some research, then now you have them having the fear of like, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? But you're right with the population and all of the concerns that we would have before giving a medication or an injection to people. I mean, for goodness sakes, we told, pregnant women, they don't eat deli meat. They don't clean out the cat litter, right? And now you're putting an injection in this special population that you have absolutely no idea what it's going to do long term, and nobody's studying it. It's like our children and our pregnant women, And like our Native Americans, they're considered special populations
Yeah.
that need to be studied,
Right,
and
right.
and there was no studies. You're right, absolutely. It was 2 months of some BS study, where they didn't even check if it, stopped transmission or infection, and they rolled it out to the masses, and they didn't tell. There was no big campaign sent out to these doctors or hospitals to say, listen, I know y'all aren't used to reporting to VAERS or dealing with vaccines. So we're going to, get you to help us and collect the data. Yeah, no, they didn't do that.
Right, because that goes against the law. Like, you are supposed to, as a healthcare professional, report every adverse effect to the VAERS system. That was totally obliterated. Like,
Mm.
I was told people would be being paid bonuses if they didn't report and if they were deleting actual reports, because it happened to my daughter. In 2020, she took the I gave her the flu. She didn't take anything. Correction, I gave it to her because I was not informed correctly, and I did not do my research properly. I was doing what I was told and what I was dictated to by her school and the government, saying that if I didn't vaccinate her, that I was not a fit parent, that I was an unfit parent, and they would call ACS and blah 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 and give me a red flag and all kind of the works. I was in fear. Okay.
Mhm.
When I gave her that flu vaccine up the nasal one, intravenous nasal,
Mhm.
her body shut down for 6 months. So I asked them, I said, this is right before COVID happened. So they couldn't diagnose it as COVID because they knew what they did, what they gave to her. And I was on top of it because I started to research, and I'm like, okay, I looked into VAERS and I saw the contraindications about that. And it says right there, bright as day, body will shut down 30 to 90 days or more. And
That
Wow.
seems
I said, why did you guys tell me to give this to my child? And then they said, oh, well, that was the 2019 flu vaccine. She has to take the 2021. I said, but she just took the flu vaccine. Why would I give her another one and her body shut down? So I'm like, if you're using my child as a scientific experiment, absolutely not. And I said, no. And they said, well, we're going to give you a red flag. I said, you can give me whatever flags you want, but I'm not giving my daughter that when I just told you that this current flu vaccine that you gave her to shut her body down. So then they said, oh, we don't have any records. That's when I know. I said, oh, this is a fraud, because they deleted what they gave to her. They deleted the records. So now I look like I'm just talking out my head. Now my daughter's in pain for no reason. You think she's not going to remember you gave her a vaccine? I said, you guys are absolutely out of your minds if you think we don't remember you gave her a vaccine. Like, just because you
Wow.
deleted it out the system doesn't mean we didn't experience it. You understand? So that's how I knew something was not right in the very beginning. This was early March. And her
Mhm.
birthday was right around the corner, and then everything shut down. And I mean, come on, you're traumatizing these children. So I want to
that
expound on that part, because I know you experienced that with the whole VAERS thing. And is that what made you want to uh like speak up about it to Project Veritas? Like, what made you speak to Project Veritas, and how do you think the major exposure of the truth impacted the world with that?
That's a good question. So it's Project Veritas. And what happened was so we had 3 waves of COVID that we saw. And that was in June of 2020, and then December, January 2021. And then now by July of 2021, I was like, okay, listen, there is enough data to show that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and this multi-drug sequence approach works. Okay. Why are we not using it now? It's been more than 6 months. It's been almost a year, over a year, that they've been talking about it. And for me, I got those medications in my cabinet in October of 2020. And I told all of my family and friends to do the same. And I had a doctor that was prescribing here. And so throughout December, January 2021, I knew a lot of people that told me that they were sick, and then I gave them the doctor's name and number that was prescribing. and all of them got better. And even people that were like on oxygen at home and struggling, the doctor even said at that time, like, listen, if you go to the hospital, you will die. Give this another day. Turn up your oxygen and give it another day. I mean, that's how many of those stories I had heard. And so when my coworker, who had just come back from leave, she had just had surgery and she was on leave, and she came back to work and they injected her. Okay. And I was sitting at that nurse's station that night when the pharmacist came around, essentially auctioning off the last 3 doses that she had and saying, okay, guys, I got 3 doses. I'm going to have to throw it away in a few hours before day shift comes in here. So is there anybody that wants it? And the other nurses on the floor were like, come on, and calling them out by name and saying, we know you haven't got yours yet. Just get it done. Get it done. And so these 3 young people went to go get it done. And 2 weeks later, I arrived to work and I find out that my coworker is there for COVID. And I was like, well, she just got that dose 2 weeks ago. And what's going on? Is she on oxygen? And they're like, no, but they're starting her on remdesivir. And I'm like, well, she doesn't even qualify for remdesivir, And they were like, yeah, well, they're giving it to her. And so anyway, make a long story short, I had a conversation with her because I went to go check in with her. And she told me, hey, Jodi, I remember those medications that you've been talking about. I want to try them. And so at that point is when I just went in full on mode, like, okay, well, we're going to get it for you. And the doctor ordered it. I had to call her in my office and respectfully say, yes, I understand that it's controversial, doc, but you are a physician. Would you look at the evidence that I have? And she did, and she ordered it. And then pharmacy blocked it. And when I got that call in the middle of the night, that pharmacy was not going to give it for anything other than lice or scabies, it was laid onto my heart to call her into my office to find out why. And so at that time is when I took my phone out and I put it on the desk because I was like, I got to record this conversation because I was so pissed off. And like, how dare you block a doctor's order, And so I recorded that conversation. And at that time, it was for me because I wanted to make sure that my emotion wasn't overtaking what I was hearing and that I could go back and listen to it again. And when I went back and listened to that interaction again, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, she's following orders. It's exactly what she's doing. And I even went a step further and said, well, do you know about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine? Here's some studies. Will you research it? And she told me she didn't have the time. And after that moment, I started recognizing like all of this stuff that was happening, and I just started recording it because I knew, guys, at that point in time that 1.5 years of propaganda messaging had already penetrated the hearts and minds of people. And the only way that people were going to snap out of it is if we hit them on an emotional level. And the only way that I knew to do that was for them to see what was happening in the hospital. So I don't discuss the length of time, but what I will say is that it was very short period of time that I had gathered the videos, and I said, I'm done. And I uploaded it to Veritas tips at protonmail.com. And that the Lord just put it on my heart. Like, okay, because I had been really in constant contact with him. Like, Lord, why do you have me here? Like, what is it that you want me to do? I want to be in your will for my life and not my own. Like, use me. Tell me what you want me to do. And when, it was laid on my heart to do that and to upload it to Project Veritas is when I felt this sense of relief and being like, okay, you know what? Come what may. I don't care what happens, but I was led to do this. And but again, guys, like, I asked the Lord to use me, right? I asked him, I was like, you have me here for a reason, and I can't be staying here anymore, having to hide the fact that there's early treatment out there and that these vaccines are causing, harmful situations and death for people. I can't be here anymore. So that was essentially what I did. And I came home and I told my kids. They were, 30 and 26 at the time, and 11. And I told them, I was like, listen, you guys know what I've been talking about for the last year and a half. Well, I recorded in the hospital, and I sent it to Project Veritas, and they were like, yeah, wow, okay, well, let's do this, Mom. And I was like, yep. So that was essentially the driving force behind it. I couldn't stand by knowing what I knew. I knew the truth, and the truth was being silenced. And yeah, I had to do something drastic because, propaganda, when somebody is influenced by propaganda, they stop critically thinking. And I knew that what I had to say personally would not really affect people, but I had to do something drastic, and I had to record what was happening in the hospital for people to have a sense of a breakthrough. And the response that I've received has just been an outpouring of love and prayer and support. And, the last year since, I mean, it's been hard. I've had to mourn, my career in a hospital, because I don't know if I could ever go back to doing those types of protocols ever again. And I work more now than I ever have. Essentially, it's 24/7. I'm on except when I'm sleeping, and I shut my phone off. But I think God is calling his remnant together. And, prior to this, I never really spoke out that much about my faith, because it's not as though I go to church every weekend or whatever. But, what people need to realize, I think it's not about belonging to a denomination, because God is going to use people from all walks of life and all denominations, that are on love and in love and on fire for him, to shine the light in this darkness. And all of these people that I looked at, as my heroes, like Merrick and McCullough and, Kim or Tammy and Kristen for the mask, and Zelenko, it's like, they were all my friends. They became my friends. And then when I met them and started developing relationships, they all had a calling as well. And what happened, what was different, is that they answered it. So it's very easy to see now for me on a daily basis. I see God's hand moving upon people, and it's such as yourselves, like, willing to give up your time and donate your time to do stories like this and get the word out. I mean, that's a calling, and I'm so thankful that you guys answered that.
Well, thank you. I'm emotional right now because I prayed for this as well, and I prayed for God to use me in around 2019, and I said, God, please use me, whatever it is, because we're all artists here, and we finally found people who think and move like us in Kevin, New York Freedom Rally. And I gotta thank you all, you and Kevin and everyone who is fighting this beast, because I have family who succumbed to this. I feel targeted. I feel like my family is going through an extinction. Like, they fell for it, and they're in hospitals with blood clots and all kinds of stuff, and I've been warning them, and no one is listening to me. So to hear this interview today, and I am thankful for your story, because they needed to hear, I guess, from a direct mouth in the hospital. I don't know what it will take, but I am so grateful to have this talk with you, and I pray that my family is there listening, and that they hear your words, every last one of your stories, your examples, and that they take that into consideration and fall out of this deep brainwash that this government has done to them. Because I'm tired. My family is asking me to book their appointments for boosters. And I told them today, I said, listen, I'm not doing that anymore. I will no longer partake in helping you die. That is
Yeah.
ridiculous. You know?
Yeah, girl. I know like this is such a heavy burden to bear. I mean, it makes me tear up right now. It's like, we talk about this as though like as though it didn't happen. But
Right.
it's happening. I mean, I remember my mom coming up to me about 6 months after my story and said, "Yeah, I just came back from the doctor and she wants me to get the vaccine." She says, "I fall in the age group and this and that." And I looked at her and I'm like, "Are you considering it?" And she said, "Yeah, like I'm one of the people at risk." And I literally looked her in the eyes and I said, "Listen, I love you, but if you decide to go take that shot and something happens to you, I'm telling you right now, I don't have the time to care for you. This is going to be your choice because I have too many people that I need to get this message out. So if you feel like you need this, then it's all on you." And I hate
Right.
to tell you that, but Mom, like my calling and my purpose is bigger than this right now. And then I was like, and I can't, and I even swore, and I was like, I can't effing believe that you're even bringing this to me now, knowing what I've done and what I've risked to get this message out, and you're considering taking it. Like, you're out of your mind. Because at first, guys, at first I was like, well, it's everybody's choice. Everybody's choice. We knew from research what could potentially happen. And now we're seeing that come to life. And let me tell you, it's nowhere near how bad it's going to get. I'm hoping Jesus comes back and we can get this ball rolling on being with him for eternity, because I mean, it's going to get so bad. But like what I tell my son, I said, listen, look at what our lives have been for the last year. Right? I said, you haven't had school, some of your friends, haven't been around, and, you've been separated and all that. I go, but ultimately, what do you think this year has been for you? And this is what I was talking about, 2020, 2021. And he was like, well, it's been fun. We've traveled, we've done this, we've done that. And I go, exactly. Because we are following what God commanded us to do, and that's choose faith over fear. It's not to say that we are going to not be affected and be stressed or have emotional issues because of all of this. But ultimately, look at how good our lives have been. And that is what I expect going forward. Like, what we're doing, it doesn't mean that we're, sheltered from this anxiety or depression or that. But we have to remember, like, he's in control and we know how this plays out.